The mountains have a way of keeping secrets. Their ridges hide valleys no map can fully capture, and their silence swallows echoes that don't belong. In the heart of such a mountain town, far from the world of parades and uniforms, lived a woman most folks barely noticed. Her name was Sophia Lane, 38 years old, quiet, sharp-eyed, hands always stained with oil. To the townspeople, she was simply a mechanic at the airfield, the one who fixed busted engines, cleared frozen runways at dawn, and worked late into the night without complaint. They knew her as blunt, reserved, the kind of woman who ended conversations with a single nod, who kept her words locked tighter than the bolts she twisted. What they didn't know, what nobody could even imagine, was that Sophia had once flown above battlefields, threading a Black Hawk helicopter through fire and chaos, carrying men and women who counted on her to get them home alive. That was before 2015, before the night she lost her team. Since then, she had not touched a cockpit. She had buried that life somewhere deep, beneath the clamor of spinning rotors and the weight of memory. Now, her world was wrenches and grease, torque specs and spark plugs. At the airfield, a few reserve soldiers trained nearby. Young, loud, restless. They joked about her when they thought she couldn't hear. There goes the grounded pilot. One would smirk as she passed. Wings clipped. Another added with a laugh. Sophia never reacted. Not a word. Not a flicker. Her silence made the jokes feel small, childish, as if their laughter bounced right off her skin. Every dawn, she knelt in the cold hangar light, running hands over engines, checking wires, listening to machines the way a musician listens to notes. She worked with precision, so sharp it almost felt supernatural. Engines she touched always roared smoother. Machines she fixed never faltered. Other mechanics whispered when they thought she was out of earshot. She knows things we don't. Like she's worked on combat birds before. But she never confirmed, never denied. She just clocked in, did the job, and disappeared back into her quiet apartment above the auto shop. There were little tells, though, little cracks in the armor. At the diner, the owner, a kind man named Robert, would sometimes mutter to new customers, "Sophia's reliable, but she's got secrets." You can see it in her eyes. Children noticed, too, when a helicopter from the reserves cut across the sky. Sophia's hands would always stop mid-repair. Her eyes would follow the machine until it slipped behind the mountains. Only then would she return to her work, her jaw tight, her silence deeper. The kids would whisper among themselves, "Why does she look at the sky like that?" Maybe she used to fly. They were closer to the truth than anyone else. When the town held its annual air show, a day of noise, banners, and military demonstrations, Sophia always volunteered to work late. She swept the hangar floors, cleaned grease from her tools, and pretended not to hear the distant roar of aircraft performing barrel rolls over cheering crowds. What no one knew was that she still kept her pilot's license active, still updated her certifications in secret, still studied old Black Hawk electrical diagrams by the dim light in her garage, tracing every line as if afraid to forget. Flying wasn't something she couldn't do. Flying was something she had chosen not to do. And so, the town only saw the mechanic, the quiet woman who never smiled too wide, who never spoke too long, who seemed content to spend her life beneath machines instead of above them. They had no idea what history lived in her silence. No clue that the same hands that rotated their tires had once gripped the controls of a Black Hawk, guiding soldiers through enemy fire. To them, she was nobody. To herself, she was unfinished. One cold morning, a young officer wandered into the hangar. He watched her work in silence for a moment before finally asking, "Have you ever flown before?" Sophia didn't even look up. "Flying is something I left behind." That was all she said, and that was all he got. But that night, back in her garage, she unfolded an old set of diagrams, the electrical system of a UH-60 Black Hawk, and studied them with the care of someone tending an old wound. The mountains kept her secret. The town carried on, never knowing. But storms don't stay silent forever. And when the call came, when the impossible happened in those high winds above the ridges, the world would remember who Sophia Lane truly was. Because even a grounded pilot never really forgets the sky. What happens when the sky calls her back? When a helicopter in trouble hovers on the edge of disaster, and the only person who can save them is a quiet mechanic no one ever really knew. It began with a sound, not the gentle hum of an engine or the low thrum of a civilian aircraft. This was harsher, urgent, a distant roar struggling against the mountain wind. Sophia was on her knees in the garage, hands deep inside the belly of an engine, when she felt it before she heard it. A shift in the air, a vibration that sent old instincts racing through her chest. She wiped her hands on a rag and stepped outside. The mountains loomed jagged and dark, their peaks crowned with restless clouds. Somewhere up there, a helicopter was fighting for its life. The wind carried fragments of sound she knew too well. The uneven whine of UH-60 Black Hawk losing stability. Her jaw tightened. Her pulse quickened. For a moment, the mechanic's mask slipped and the pilot beneath it stirred. High above the valley, a training exercise had gone wrong. The reserve unit had launched on a standard drill, search and rescue practice in unpredictable mountain terrain. Nothing unusual, nothing dangerous, until the pilot, young, healthy, full of confidence, collapsed mid-flight. A sudden medical emergency. No warning, no time. The crew scrambled, but without their pilot, the aircraft was a beast untamed. Automatic systems failed. Backup controls glitched. The Black Hawk bucked in the wind, bleeding altitude as the ridges grew sharper beneath it. They radioed for support, but the nearest qualified crew was still hours away. Hours the helicopter didn't have. Inside the spinning bird, fear grew heavy. Soldiers clung to straps, eyes darting from gauges to windows. One muttered a prayer. Another shouted into the radio, voice cracking, "We need a replacement pilot right now." Static answered. Then a voice cut through. Lieutenant Michael Torres, watching from the ground, heart pounding. He had trained with Sophia more than a decade earlier, back when she was still the best of the best. His memory sharpened like a blade. There's one person. But she doesn't wear the uniform anymore. Michael's Jeep roared through the streets of the mountain town, gravel spitting under its tires. He barely slowed as he turned into the garage lot. Inside, Sophia stood exactly where he expected her. Grease on her hands, spark plugs laid out neatly in a tray, hair tied back with the same simplicity she'd always carried. Their eyes met. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Then, Sophia tilted her head slightly, almost as if she had heard the helicopter's cry herself. Someone needs to be brought home safely, don't they? Michael's chest tightened. She hadn't flown in years. Everyone knew it. But somehow she knew. "No time to explain," he said. "The Black Hawk's losing altitude. Pilot's down. The crew." "I'll need 3 minutes to change," she interrupted. And just like that, the decision was made. In the back of the garage, she opened a metal trunk no one had seen before. Inside lay her old flight suit, worn but clean, patches faded yet proud. She ran her fingers over the insignia, the ghost of her past stitched into the fabric. When she emerged, the jumpsuit fit her like it had been waiting all these years. The mechanic was gone. In her place stood a soldier, a pilot, a woman who once commanded the sky. Michael whispered to himself, almost in disbelief. "She's back!" At the airfield, chaos buzzed like electricity. Technicians shouted over radios. Soldiers scrambled to prepare gear. Everyone knew the situation was critical. The crippled helicopter was drifting toward rocky terrain, fuel running low, crew in danger, pilot unconscious. And then she walked onto the tarmac. Heads turned. Conversation stopped. The same soldiers who once mocked her fell silent, watching as the quiet mechanic revealed herself. Her posture changed, every step steady, precise, as if the weight of hundreds of past missions had slipped back onto her shoulders. One young private whispered to another, "Is that her?" The mechanic. But nobody laughed this time. Michael briefed her quickly, flipping through weather charts and terrain maps. His voice was sharp, urgent. Unstable weather. Wind gusts up to 40 knots. Crosswinds from the northeast. Visibility's down to 2 miles. Cloud ceiling dropping fast. Sophia studied the maps, her eyes scanning with laser focus. She barely blinked. Every detail sank into the deep well of her experience. filing itself alongside memories of Afghanistan and Iraq. Countless missions where the margin for error had been thinner than a hair. She asked one question, voice calm but firm. What's the terrain below? Steep ridges, narrow valleys. Worst place for an emergency landing. She nodded slowly, already running calculations in her head. Approach angles, wind drift, fuel burn. The Black Hawk wasn't just a machine to her. It was muscle and bone, breath and heartbeat. Finally, she looked up. This isn't about flying, she said quietly. It's about bringing people home alive. The soldiers listening felt a chill. They weren't looking at a mechanic anymore. They were looking at someone forged in fire, someone who had lived inside the storm and come out the other side. How long since your last flight? A nervous voice asked from the crowd. Sophia's lips curved in the faintest smile. The helicopter doesn't forget, she replied. It just waits for the right hands to guide it. The Black Hawk sat on the tarmac like a sleeping giant, rotors still, body gleaming under the harsh lights. Sophia approached it the way someone approaches an old friend. She placed a hand on the metal skin, whispering something no one else could hear. Then she climbed in, every switch, every gauge, every control surface. Her hands moved with the certainty of muscle memory. The years melted away. This was where she belonged. She lifted the radio, voice calm, unwavering. Tower, this is Rescue 1. Request immediate clearance for emergency medical evacuation. The tower answered, static crackling. Rescue 1, you're cleared for takeoff. Godspeed. The rotors groaned, then thundered to life. Dust whipped across the tarmac. Soldiers shielded their eyes as a giant rose, trembling, then steadied under her command. The town watched in stunned silence. The mechanic who had kept her head down, who spoke to no one, who hit her past like a wound, was now climbing into the storm to save lives. The sky had called her back, and she had answered. But could Sophia face the mountains again? High winds, narrow ridges, a helicopter on the brink of falling. The crew's lives hung by a thread, and only she could decide whether they would see the ground alive. The Black Hawk lifted from the tarmac, rotors screaming against the mountain winds. Dust and gravel scattered below as Sophia eased the aircraft into the night sky. The crew strapped in behind her, eyes wide, knuckles white. Some had flown before, but none had ever felt this. The controlled violence of a machine built for war, guided by hands that treated it like an extension of the body. Sophia's voice came calm through the intercom. Strap in. No sudden movements. We've got a long way to go, and the weather isn't on our side. Her tone carried something unshakable, something that reached beyond the words. It was the sound of experience, of someone who had been here before, in storms, in chaos, in the thin place between life and death. And for the first time that night, the crew believed they might make it. The wind hit hard as they cleared the first ridge. Gusts slammed against the fuselage, shoving the helicopter sideways. The machine shuddered, metal groaning under pressure. Sophia didn't flinch. Her hands worked instinctively, feather and collective, tapping the pedals, easing the cyclic stick with microscopic adjustments. She rode the storm the way a surfer rides waves, not fighting the mountain winds, but moving with them. Below, the valley was a jagged black scar. Pine trees swayed violently. Snow peeled from cliffs in sheets, caught in the rotor wash and flung into the dark. Visibility's dropping. Michael Torres reported from the co-pilot seat. Barely 2 miles now. Sophia's eyes narrowed, scanning through the clouds. We don't need 2 miles, she said. We just need enough to find them. Minutes stretched into eternity as they pressed deeper into the mountains. Every second meant the disabled helicopter was burning fuel, losing altitude. Every second, the unconscious pilot's life bled thinner. Finally, through a break in the storm, the crippled bird appeared. It hovered unsteadily over a narrow ridge, swaying like a drunk about to collapse. The temporary pilot inside, a young crew chief thrust into the seat out of desperation, was wrestling with the controls. Panic etched across his face. The rotors dipped dangerously close to the rock walls. Sophia keyed the radio. Her voice was firm, commanding, the kind of voice that could cut through panic like a blade. This is Rescue 1. I have visual on your aircraft. Maintain current position. Do not attempt further maneuvering. The reply crackled, shaking. I can't hold her. She's slipping. Listen to me, Sophia snapped. You're doing fine. Lock the controls where they are. I'll take care of the rest. Something in her tone broke through the fear. The young crew chief froze, hands steadying, eyes wide as though realizing an angel had spoken to the radio. Sophia circled once, assessing the terrain. The options were grim. The ridge offered nothing but jagged stone. Wind curled between the peaks, creating invisible fists that shoved at her aircraft with every pass. There was only one possible landing zone, a small clearing, barely the width of her rotor span, wedged between two rock formations with less than 10 feet of clearance on either side. From the ground, the controller's voice came, thick with worry. Rescue one, that LZ looks too tight. Abort and wait for backup. Sophia's reply was steady, almost defiant. Copy that, but I've landed in tighter spots. She angled the Black Hawk into position. The crew behind her held their breath. Even Michael Torres, who trusted her more than anyone alive, felt his stomach twist. The descent began. Wind slammed the aircraft, trying to push it off course. Sophia countered with smooth, precise movements, never overcorrecting, never rushing. The nose dipped. The skids crept closer to the rock walls. 10 feet of clearance shrank to 6, then to 4. Jesus, one soldier muttered under his breath. Quiet, Sophia said sharply. Let me fly. Every nerve in her body burned with focus. She could feel the air itself, the pressure changes, the invisible currents whipping between the cliffs. Her feet and hands worked in perfect harmony, instinct guiding what instruments couldn't. The ground rushed up. The Black Hawk kissed the clearing, with barely a bounce. Dust and snow spiraled into the air, blinding for a moment, and then silence. The rotors steadied. They were down. The rescue team moved instantly. Doors flung open. Soldiers leapt out, running toward the crippled bird. The unconscious pilot was slumped against his harness, skin pale, breath shallow. Sophia kept her rotor spinning, eyes flicking between gauges. She held the Black Hawk steady, ready to lift the instant the patient was secured. Her voice came sharp, precise. Move fast. We don't have time. The medical crew transferred the pilot with practiced urgency. His pulse was weak but steady. They strapped him onto the stretcher inside Sophia's aircraft. Michael climbed back in, shouting over the roar. Vitals holding, but he needs a hospital now. Sophia's eyes locked on the gauges one last time. Then she spoke, calm as stone. Then let's bring him home. The return flight was no victory lap. The storm had worsened. Crosswinds hammered the Black Hawk, and snow whipped against the windshield like bullets. But now the stakes were even higher, a life on board that couldn't endure rough flying. Sophia adjusted her route, threading the valleys instead of climbing over them. It added 10 minutes to the flight. 10 minutes they didn't have, but it was safer, smoother. Michael glanced at her, puzzled. How did you know about this route? Sophia's reply was simple, almost casual. I've studied these mountains for 5 years. Every mechanic should know the ground they might need to fly over. Michael stared at her, realizing the truth. She had never stopped being a pilot, not for one day. The hospital landing pad came into view at last, glowing faintly through the storm, a beacon of hope. Emergency crews waited below, stretchers and equipment ready. Sophia flared the aircraft, bringing it down with such precision that the skids barely touched the pad. Smooth. Perfect. The medical team swarmed forward, pulling the unconscious pilot out with practiced speed. For a moment, though, they hesitated, looking up at the cockpit. Who's flying that bird? One asked. Michael answered quietly with pride. The mechanic. Sophia powered down the engines, pulling off her helmet. Her hair was damp with sweat, her eyes blazing with the quiet fire of someone who had just stared down death and won. The crew looked at her differently now, not as a mechanic, not even as a former soldier. They looked at her as the reason they were still alive. But saving one life was only the beginning. Word of her flight spread faster than wildfire. And soon, Sophia would have to face the one thing she had avoided for years, recognition. And with it, The past she thought she had buried forever. The storm passed, but its echoes lingered. By the next morning, the story had already spread, not through official channels, not yet, but through whispers, radio chatter, and the hushed voices of soldiers who had seen the impossible with their own eyes. The mechanic had flown, the grounded woman had risen, and she had brought them home alive. At the hospital, the rescued pilot was stable. The doctors said he would recover. His crew, still shaken, couldn't stop replaying what they had witnessed. A landing that defied logic, a flight through winds that should have torn the bird apart, and a woman whose hands never once trembled. They said she was just a mechanic. One whispered. Not anymore, another replied. Back in town, Sophia walked into her garage as if nothing had happened. She hung her jumpsuit carefully in the back closet, folded her helmet into its bag, and tied her hair into the same simple knot. By noon, she was back on her knees, tightening bolts on a sputtering engine. Grease smeared across her knuckles. To anyone passing by, it looked like an ordinary day. But nothing was ordinary anymore. That evening, Michael Torres appeared in the doorway, still in uniform, his face carrying the weight of what he'd witnessed. You should know, he said quietly. The general was there. He saw everything. Sophia didn't look up. Engines don't fix themselves. I'm serious. Sophia, you saved 20 lives last night. That's not something anyone can ignore. She tightened the bolt, testing it with her wrench. I didn't do it to be noticed. I did it because they needed to come home. Michael stepped closer. And that's exactly why people need to know who you are. Her eyes flicked up at him, sharp and steady. No, recognition comes with questions. Questions come with orders. And I'm not here to wear anyone's uniform again. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then Michael nodded slowly. He understood, but he also knew the truth. Secrets don't stay buried when they're carried on rotor blades and whispered through mountain winds. The next morning, the base commander himself, a brigadier general with a chest full of medals, walked into the garage. Soldiers trailed behind him, their boots heavy on the concrete floor. Sophia didn't pause her work. She wiped grease from her hands and greeted him with the same calm she gave everyone else. Can I help you with something, sir? The general studied her. His eyes weren't unkind, but they held the weight of authority. We just let someone like you change spark plugs for 5 years without knowing what we had, he said quietly. Sophia set her wrench down and turned fully to him. Her expression was steady, unimpressed by his rank. I wasn't just cleaning engines, she replied. I was staying ready. The general's lips twitched, as though he almost smiled, but he didn't press further. He simply gave her a nod of respect, the kind soldiers reserved for those who have earned it the hard way, and walked out. The town began to change around her. At the diner, Robert stopped introducing her as the quiet mechanic. Instead, he leaned across the counter and whispered to new customers. She once saved 20 lives in a storm, with her own hands. Children who once asked why she stared at the sky now pointed when helicopters flew over. That's her, they'd whisper. She can fly those. Even the reserve soldiers who had once mocked her fell silent when she walked past. Some approached her hesitantly, asking questions about weather patterns or flight controls. She answered simply, never boasting, never drawing attention. Respect had replaced suspicion. But Sophia herself remained unchanged. She still rose early, still wiped down her tools with quiet discipline, still lingered outside at dusk when the sound of helicopters echoed through the valleys. But on Saturdays, a new routine formed. At first, it was just one boy, the same child who had once asked his father why the mechanic always looked at the sky. He showed up timidly, holding a battered notebook. Will you teach me? He asked. Sophia studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded once. Be here at 6. Engines don't wait for latecomers. Word spread. Soon, half a dozen young people gathered outside her garage every weekend. Sophia began teaching them the basics of aerodynamics, navigation, and safety. Not in classrooms, but in the hangar with grease on their hands and wind in their faces. She never charged a cent. She never advertised. She just taught. And in time, her garage became more than a workplace. It became a place of learning, a place of quiet legacy. At the base, the UH-60 crew she had saved installed a small inscription on the side of their helicopter. Flying is about courage, not rank. And at the airfield, soldiers began referring to her as something new. Not the mechanic, not even the pilot. They called her the one who brings people home. Still, Sophia refused recognition. When the town's annual air show returned, organizers begged her to speak, to stand on stage, to receive applause. She declined every time. Instead, she volunteered quietly, directing traffic, checking aircraft, ensuring safety protocols. Her students, however, flew a small demonstration. Simple maneuvers, nothing flashy. Sophia stood at the edge of the runway, arms crossed, watching with the faintest flicker of pride. Michael joined her. "You know you could be up there too." "I never stop flying," she replied, tapping her temple. "I just choose when to leave the ground." And yet, sometimes late at night, neighbors would see her standing outside longer than usual. She would look toward the dark horizon, listening to the distant chop of rotor blades fading into silence. Her expression was calm, but her eyes carried the weight of memory, of skies filled with fire, of comrades lost, of a past that never fully let go. Sophia had reclaimed her place in the sky, but not the way anyone expected. She chose silence over applause, teaching over medals. Yet, deep down, one question lingered: what happens the next time the mountains call? Time has a way of softening storms. Weeks passed, then months. The mountains returned to silence, the town to routine. But Sophia Lane was no longer invisible. She hadn't asked for recognition, and she hadn't sought it. Yet the story of that night, the storm, the impossible landing, the lives she saved, spread far beyond the ridges. Soldiers whispered it in mess halls. Pilots repeated it on airstrips. And in the small town where she lived, the mechanic was no longer just a mechanic. The rescued pilot recovered. Months later, he walked into Sophia's garage, uniform crisp, posture stiff with nerves. She was bent over an engine, sleeves rolled up, grease on her arms. When he spoke, his voice carried the raw weight of truth. "You saved my life." Sophia didn't look up. "You would have done the same for me." He shook his head. "No, I couldn't have flown through that storm. Nobody could have." For the first time, her hands stilled. Slowly, she lifted her eyes, studying him. Then, with the faintest nod, she returned to her work. That was all. No speeches, no embrace, just a quiet acknowledgement between two people who understood what survival really meant. The community began to change in small ways. The young soldiers who once mocked her now came to her for advice on maintenance, weather, navigation. They no longer saw her as a mystery to laugh at, but as a well of knowledge they could learn from. Pilots passing through town sought her opinion before flying mountain routes. Her word carried weight, even unspoken. If Sophia said it was safe, they trusted her. If she said wait, they waited. Her garage became more than a workshop. It became a gathering place. On weekends, the students she taught filled the hangar, notebooks in hand, eyes wide as she explained the art flight. Not just how to work an engine or read a gauge, but how to listen to a machine, how to feel the sky through their fingertips. She never lectured. She told stories. Stories of mistakes, of near misses, of lessons written in sweat and fear. She told them not how to be heroes, but how to bring people home alive. And they listened, always. The town's annual air show grew larger each year. At first, Sophia refused every invitation to be honored. She cleaned runways, checked aircraft, and let others take the stage. But slowly, she allowed her students to take the spotlight. They performed simple demonstrations, coordinated flybys, careful landings, nothing flashy, but everything precise. Sophia stood in the background, arms crossed, watching with quiet pride. The announcers never called her name, but everyone in the crowd knew who had trained those kids, who had shaped their confidence. And the applause that followed belonged, in some unspoken way, to her. Michael Torres noticed a change most of all. "She's not hiding anymore," he told Robert at the diner one morning. "She's just being herself. Someone who serves without needing the applause. Robert nodded, glancing toward the airfield where Sophia worked beneath the sun. Sleeves rolled high, hair tied back, hands steady on an engine. Some people don't need to stand on stages, he said. They just need to know they're ready when it counts. But Sophia's greatest legacy wasn't medals or ceremonies. It was the way people around her began to see differently. The townsfolk who once overlooked her now looked around their own lives. The quiet teacher, the unassuming neighbor, the old man who fixed radios on weekends. Perhaps they too carried hidden stories, buried skills, untold courage. Sophia had taught them something greater than flying. She had taught them never to underestimate the quiet ones. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the ridges gold, Sophia stood outside her garage. She listened to the faint, distant thrum of helicopters heading home. Her students had gone for the night. The hangar was quiet. For once, she allowed herself a small smile. A child passing by stopped and asked a question so many had wondered. "Why don't you fly all the time? You're so good at it." Sophia crouched, meeting his eyes. Her voice was soft, steady. "I never stop flying," she said, tapping her temple. "I just choose when to leave the ground." The boy thought about that for a moment, then grinned and ran off, his laughter trailing behind him. Sophia stood again, gazing at the sky. She didn't need medals. She didn't need applause. She had something far greater, the knowledge that when the world called, when lives hung in the balance, she could rise. And that was enough, because true heroism doesn't demand recognition. It doesn't require an audience. It lives quietly in those who stay ready, who act when others freeze, who carry the sky within them even when their feet are on the ground. In every community, there are people like Sophia, quiet, overlooked, hidden in plain sight. Mechanics, teachers, neighbors, people who carry skills and encourage the world may never see until the moment demands it. So here's the question I'll leave with you. Who are the Sophias in your life? The quiet ones who might just be heroes when everything is on the line. Share their stories. Because sometimes the greatest wings aren't worn on uniforms. They're carried in silence, waiting for the day they're needed.